Right. I think it's time for us to get started. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to today's presentation on everyone's favorite topic, taxes. It's almost like the universal language we all speak, whether we want to or not. Now let's talk about the IRS and New York State tax collections. Did you know that the IRS has hired a whopping 80,000 new employees between last year and this year? It's like they're preparing for the tax apocalypse or something like that. And speaking of aggressive, New York State is stepping up its game also. It's like they've taken inspiration from a determined toddler reaching for that last cookie on the top shelf. So buckle up, folks, because navigating these tax orders might be trickier than finding your way out of a corn maze blindfolded. But hey, at least we'll have a good laugh along the way. With all that in mind, I want to introduce Marissa Friedrich. She's heads up our tax controversy group and is pretty much a know-it-all in any area of tax issues that might come up. Marissa, good morning. I will turn the floor over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Alan. We can just go to the beginning of the presentation. Morning, everyone. So as Alan mentioned, yes, both the IRS and New York State have stepped up their game and going after people to get more money. As we know, New York State is very financially strapped, so any which way that can get some more revenue, they'll do it. So first, we're going to start off with the IRS. And the IRS and New York State are very similar in their collection actions as well as the alternatives available to taxpayers. But we'll take one at a time because there are, several different nuances for each entity. The way in which the IRS likes to get people to come to the table are in various ways, one of which is a passport revocation. So imagine you're on a trip, you're overseas, and you just get notified that your passport has been revocated and you're unable to return. Or you've planned the trip of a lifetime to Europe and you get a notice from the State Department saying your passport is no longer available. That can really put a damper on your plan. So really the overlying takeaway from this whole presentation is to really open those envelopes. You get envelopes from the IRS in New York State, open them up. There are resolutions. We are here to help. So make sure that you understand where you're at, what's going on, so that you don't get into these situations at the 11th hour. So if we could just go back a couple of slides, Alan, just to the first, I just want to mention passport revocation happens when you have a seriously delinquent tax liability with the IRS and you haven't really responded. You haven't come to the table to offer something as an alternative to payment or full payment, etc. So the IRS will inform the State Department and they will either revoke your current passport or stop the processing of a passport application. Next slide. So when does that happen? That happens when you have a liability that is greater than $59,000. And that gets adjusted every year for inflation. This is the current amount for 2023, and that includes penalties and interest. You will be getting notice. Again, that's why I emphasize opening those envelopes, because you will get notice and you will get the opportunity to get into some type of payment plan so that you will avoid this. There's limited ways in which the U.S. will allow you back into the United States. Again, getting into some type of payment alternative will help with that. Next slide. Here are some exceptions. Again, you're in a collection alternative. You already have an installment agreement. You're in an offer and compromise program. Then you can have some type of argument to make that you should not have gotten your passport revocated. There's policy exceptions. Liabilities of a deceased person. It happened due to identity theft. You're in a federal disaster area. Those are some reasons for you to say that the passport revocation should not have happened or should be overturned. Next. Okay, so this is how it happens when you want to get it reversed. The IRS notifies the State Department and they give them the reason for what happened. It was erroneous. It was not enforceable. You paid your liability in full. You're in some type of payment plan. And then at that point, you can get your passport and back into place. If it's of some type of urgent nature, there are some avenues we can take to get it to the proper people. You will need to show upcoming flight information to show that you're going overseas and it requires your passport to get that expedited. Next. Wage garnishment is another way in which the state can really get you to the table to, discuss your tax liability. It's not something you see often, but it is a continuous wage levy. It's very onerous. It comes out of your paycheck. Those are the amounts there listed, for the exemptions there and for the dependents claimed. It's not something we see often. The next ones are the ones we see more often, which are IRS levies. So what is a levy? Essentially, you get a notice from the IRS saying, hey, taxpayer, you owe us X dollars, please pay by a certain date, and you ignore it or you don't, make the phone call to the IRS to come into some type of payment arrangement, and you continue to get balance due notices. And those continue until the IRS really has had enough and they issue a notice of intent to levy. And that's really putting you on notice that they're going to levy your bank account. Go back, please. Back more. Okay, so a notice of intent to levy will be issued, and you do have some rights. Next slide, Alan. You do have some rights with that. When the final notice of intent to levy is issued, you can file what is called a collection due process hearing. That essentially you're saying to the IRS that imposing an IRS levy on your bank account will impose some undue hardship for yourself. So you have to make the claim that that's the situation. Then you go to the collection due process hearing, which is an appeals, and you put forth your case there. How the bank levy works, it's essentially a snapshot. Whatever is in your bank account at that time is the amount that the IRS takes. It's not a continuing levy like the New York State one is. The bank is required to hold those funds for 21 days, again, giving you the opportunity to go to the IRS and try and get to some type of payment arrangement such that that would stop the bank levy. And the IRS has overreaching powers to really any bank account in the country. So that, again, open those letters so that you're aware of what is owed and you can avoid those situations. Tax liens are, they secure the government's interest in one of your properties. So if you have a property, the IRS can put a tax lien on it. And that makes it very difficult for you to be able to sell that property. Again, forcing you to come to the table to get into some type of payment arrangement or fully pay your liability. You do have appeal rights. They're known as CDP, which is collection due process, and CAP, a collection appeals program. And those can be filed, again, to show that a tax lien would cause undue hardship, or perhaps the IRS made an error in filing those tax liens. A new program, it's essentially new, is the IRS first-time penalty abatement. So normally people would say, I really don't deserve that penalty. I had all these reasons why I couldn't pay on time or I failed to file. The IRS has given people the opportunity, some relief, for lack of a better word, to get a relief on those penalties that they've issued. And it's a one-time thing, and it applies only to failure to file, failure to pay, or failure to deposit. And those are your estimated payments. If you don't qualify for the first-time penalty abatement, there are certain, parameters in place for whether or not you can qualify. You do have the opportunity to ask for a penalty due to reasonable cause. This is a much harder argument to make. That's the next slide, Alan. You have to show that there was reasonable cause for you to failing to file or failing to deposit or failing to pay your liability. And usually that reasonable cause is based upon some grounds. What are the grounds? You did everything in your power to get this done, but it didn't happen because of X, Y, and Z. And those grounds are usually there was a death in the family, or your death, and that's why the return didn't get filed. Illness, you were absolutely very ill, or illness of an immediate family member to which you had to attend and weren't available to file the tax return or pay the funds. All your files get destroyed. There's a natural disaster, a fire in the house, and you do not have the documentation to file properly or to make the payment on time. Any type of actions, legal proceedings that are in place that are prohibiting you from being able to file. Those are all grounds. It's a very high standard, very difficult to get. You can make those pleas to the IRS. They do go under review. Next slide. They are reviewed, and if you do get approved, that's great. Your penalties are abated. And it's not just a first-time penalty abatement. It's something that if it does happen again, you're available to use again. But here's some facts that they consider. What happened? When did it happen? What did you do to remedy this situation? Did you file or pay your taxes soon after? That's a big one that the IRS will look to, is once you were able, you were back on your feet, you had the information, you had the ability to pay your taxes. Did you do that timely? Or did you wait a very long time before you did so? So they're going to weigh those circumstances and whether or not they grant the penalty relief.
So I guess if you get these IRS levies or IRS penalties against you, what can you do? What alternatives are there if that happens, Marissa?
So there are a few things available to taxpayers. Again, New York State differs slightly from the IRS, but similar programs. There are things called installment agreements. Installment agreements is essentially a payment plan where you pay over time. You sometimes have to submit financial information for approval. Sometimes if you're under a certain threshold amount, you can go right online, log into your IRS account and be able to apply for one right there without having to do much work. Just insert some information. What is your ability to pay over time? How many months? And you can be granted. You do have to be current and when you enter into an installment agreement. You can't, and what I mean by current means you're paying and filing timely all your future obligations. If you feel that you might come into some type of issue with filing a future tax return or paying it fully, you may want to reconsider the timing of entering into an installment agreement, or you may want to just give the IRS a heads up saying, hey, I may not be able to file my tax return timely. I am in an installment agreement. Can I amend the installment agreement to include those additional periods and amounts? And then they will consider whether or not that's something that they would do. And also understanding that interest and penalties continue to accrue throughout the installment agreement. This is not a free ride. There is a cost to it. I always advise clients, if you're able to find the funding somewhere else for better financing, certainly do so. IRS is very scary and they can come after you, as we just mentioned all the collection avenues. So if you're able to get some type of relief in other ways through a HELOC or a second mortgage on your home or a personal loan, definitely consider those before entering into an installment agreement. Here's some of the types of installment agreements. One back, there we go. And they're, like I said, there's different financial parameters, amounts owed, and over how many years you can pay it. We have guaranteed, streamlined, non-streamlined. There's ones for businesses. If you don't fit within any of those, there's the routine installment agreement. And then there's the partial pay installment agreement, which is a really great avenue to use, and it's very underutilized. When an offer and compromise perhaps is not something that's available to you, you can certainly enter into a partial pay installment agreement. And that just means you can't pay within the time the IRS has to collect, the statute of limitations. So you may want to consider a partial pay. Another program that the IRS offers is called an offer and compromise. And this is what people give it a misnomer of, entering into an agreement with the IRS for pennies on the dollar. And that's a misnomer because it's not what you can do. It's not that you walk up to the IRS and say, hey, I'll offer you $20 on $100 that I owe you. It essentially is a calculation. It's a calculation that looks to your net equity and your assets and your future earning potential. And then there's a determination made whether or not that is something that's in the benefit or the best interest of the government to enter into the offer and compromise to allow you to pay less than what is owed. It will fully resolve all your outstanding liabilities. And there's two types in which you can pay in a lump sum, or you can pay a little bit over time. Here are the three different grounds. You can have a doubt as to collectability. That's where you really don't have the ability to pay. And like I said, there's the calculation, which is your net equity and assets and your future earning potential over time. Then there's the ones that are doubt as to collectability. That is a doubt as to liability, excuse me. Doubt as to liability is I really don't owe this amount and I don't understand why the IRS is coming after me, and I have the information to prove that this is not my liability, or that the amount that's being requested from the IRS is incorrect. I actually owe a lot less, and I also have the documentation to show. And then there's the ones that are effective tax administration due to economic hardship. Those are really, really extremely difficult to show, but we have gotten some of those. I think the last one I had, a taxpayer owed over $1 million, and he entered into an offer and compromise for $5,000. Again, very extenuating circumstances, lots of hardship, but it is doable. It's just very difficult. So after there's the initial review, that the taxpayer, it works with an examiner to look at all the financials and documentations to see if the offer is in the best interest of the government. Then it's either recommended for acceptance. Sometimes they're returned. And when they are returned, you have to start all over again. You don't have appeal rights. It's because you either didn't provide the right information, or you just don't qualify, or for some reason, the government is returning it to you, or you get rejected. The amount is too low. They want something higher, but you do have appeal rights. If you really strongly feel that that is the correct amount and the examiner wasn't looking at your information correctly or properly, you can go to appeals and have an independent appeals officer review the information and make a determination at that point. Then the last program that's available is what's called currently not collectible. So the IRS will look to your financial circumstances and say, we understand that you cannot make your basic living expenses, and therefore you also cannot even pay us anything on a monthly basis towards your liability, and we're going to enter you into a currently not collectible status. And essentially the IRS kind of leaves you alone for a little bit of time. They'll come back and check up on you to make sure that now you're in a position to be able to pay, and you will have to produce financials and show that you have economic hardship. But CNC is a great tool if it's available to you, because again, the IRS really lays off and doesn't pursue collection action against you until you can get back on your feet and be able to resolve those liabilities. But knowing that interest again and penalties continue to accrue.
So I guess this kind of finishes up the portion regarding the IRS, Marissa.
Yes.
Let's spend a little time talking about New York State. New York State has really gotten much more aggressive than any time I've ever seen in the past, whether it be residency issues, people trying to leave the state, people not filing New York State tax returns. So let's spend a little time on the New York State, collection enforcement. What can they do?
So much like the IRS, Alan, they don't obviously have a passport, but they have this great tool, the driver's license. So they really have understood how they get many people to come to the table to help to resolve their tax liabilities. They have started to suspend people's driver's licenses. Again, it's a fairly new program. If you owe more than $10,000 in tax penalty and interest, you will get your driver's license suspended. Unless you have, again, some type of collection alternative in place, such as an installment agreement, offer and compromise, or an income execution. You do get lots of notification. This is not something that just happens the minute you tick over to the $10,000 mark. That's why, again, I stress opening those letters. They will not go away. So open those letters. New York State gives you lots of notice. They will tell you that your driver's license will be suspended in 60 days unless you come and enter into some type of collection alternative or pay your balance in full. If you don't respond to that, They will send something to the DMV to let them know, hey, we have a delinquent taxpayer. The DMV then in turn will send you a notice that in 15 days, if you do not resolve your tax situation, your driver's license will be suspended. There are exceptions, obviously public policy, a missing spouse, bankruptcy, garnishment for child support or unpaid taxes. So there are exceptions, and you absolutely can go and get a restricted driver's license, which allows you to go to work or drive your kids to school, but that's very limiting. And then if you are sitting there and saying, well, who cares? I have a driver's license in Pennsylvania, or I have a driver's license in New Jersey, or in Kansas, or some other state. Understand that New York State has this compact with 45 other states plus the District of Columbia, in which your driver's license will be suspended in those states as well. There's only 5 non-participating states: Georgia, Maine, Michigan, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. So if you're banking on having a driver's license in another state, that's just not going to work. Now, responsible person assessments are what really throw people off. People do not expect these, because what is a responsible person? Responsible person is really anyone that's actively involved in the operating or the operations of a business on a daily basis. You are one that is deciding all the financial obligations of the business. You're making you're doing the hiring and the firing of personnel. You're on the bank signing cards or have bank signing authority. You're actually signing checks. So some people invest in companies and businesses, and they really do not understand the implications thereof. So one of which is becoming a responsible person if the business itself has some type of liability. And this goes with respect to withholding taxes and obviously sales and use tax. There is some relief possible for you can go next, for limited liability companies. Again, people think they're sheltered when they enter into some type of membership in an LLC. Typically, there's strict liability for those partners, and you're liable for 100% of the unpaid sales tax. But most recently, there's been some relief next slide. There is some relief if you really were not in a duty to comply with those state tax laws. So you did not have the duty to collect the sales tax. That was not within your parameters or your involvement in the business. And you have less than a 50% ownership interest in that business. And usually your liability is limited to the greater of your ownership interest in the profit, your ownership interest or percentage of share of profits and losses in the business. So be very careful when you are in an LLC, what your duties are. Make sure everything is specifically delineated. So New York State versus federal tax lien. So who takes precedent? Usually the IRS's lien will take priority over a New York State warrant. The difference with the IRS in New York State is with the IRS, you had the appeal rights. If you remember, I said you can go and ask for a review of the situation to show undue hardship if the lien were to go through. New York State, you do not have any appeal rights at all. New York State warrant works much like the lien in the IRS situation. It's public record. There's the website. You can go on there, you can search your neighbor or your friend and see if they have a warrant against them. It's all public record. You get notice after the warrant is filed. There is no pre-notice on when a warrant will be filed. You have no appeal rights. And the warrant is in effect. It does not expire. Oh, just one, go back, please.
Sorry.
That's okay. Just want to make this point that it goes into effect and it can last, where is it? No. A few slides before. There you go. 10 years against real property and 20 years against personal property. So a warrant can be attached to your house or your land or your business for 10 years, 20 years against personal property. So that's important to know. And it's not when they issue the warrant, it's 20 years from the date the warrant could have been filed.
We see this all the time when we're disposing of real estate, buying and selling real estate, where people that are selling have tax warrants. And in order to give clear title to the buyer, we're going to have to get these liens, these warrants removed. So at some point, even though it's there, a lot of people feel, even though it's there, I won't worry about it. The interest and penalties keep accruing. And when the time comes to sell, there's no question the tax man will come and look for their money.
Right. And then there's, again, ways in which you can work around that and getting discharges and such, but it is an absolute headache, for lack of a better word, when trying to sell your property if you have a warrant.
An understatement, a headache. Yes.
Yes. Another avenue available is income executions. And much like the wage garnishment of the IRS, the New York State will come and take a certain percentage of the gross earnings of the taxpayer towards the liability. And it will continue on until the liability is satisfied in full. You have the first service. So first, New York State comes to the taxpayer and says, hey, do you want to make voluntary payments? Give them 20 days to respond and say, yes, I agree or not. Again, open those envelopes, because many people just discard those thinking that the state will go away. Well, no, they're not going to go away. In fact, the second service, they actually go to your employer. So now your employer will know that you have liabilities with the state, and the state will work directly with the employer to get its percentage of your income, and again, until it's satisfied in full. So open those envelopes. Levy action. Again, another difference with the way the levies work with the IRS. When there's a bank levy, you get no notice from New York State. Remember, the IRS gave you certain notices. They gave you notice of demands for payment, and then you got intent to levy, and then you got that final intent to levy, and you still had the ability to appeal those and get those halted, at least until you resolve it at appeals. New York State does not give you that opportunity at all. They only, again, a little asterisk, New York State can only attach to banks located in the state. So that's something to be mindful of. And also note that the levy continues for 90 days. So if you continue to put money into the bank account, the state has the right to take it out for 90 days. It's not that snapshot like with the IRS. It continues on for 90 days. Again, third-party actions, they can go after not only your bank accounts, but your merchant services provided, your credit card companies, tenants, receivables. And also New York State gets refund offsets from the federal government. So say you're involved in federal contract projects. The federal contract, the DOJ essentially, or the Department of State, will come in and take those refunds and send them to New York State to offset your liability, totally circumventing you, and you will not see a dollar of that money. So just so you know that's another way they can take your money. One thing that the IRS normally doesn't do, but they will do if they need to, but seizures and sales are very frequent with New York State. You probably have seen, maybe, I hope not, those signs somewhere along the way where the property has been seized by the Department of Taxation and Finance due to non-payment of taxes. They will seize cash. They'll change your locks. They really will take all the inventory out of your business, and it will be sold at auction. And you get the fair market value less the expenses involved with that auction. Also available is collateral sanctions. So if you have a business where you need a sales tax certificate of authority and you're not paying your taxes, the state might refuse to issue it, or they'll revoke it. They will probably refuse to give you your lottery license, liquor license, and cigarette license.
All right. So just like the IRS, once you have a levy or a notice from the IRS, from the New York State that you owe money, what alternatives are out there so that you can start to make the payments? I'm sure it's a little the same as the IRS, but I'm sure there's some subtleties.
Yes. So the first big difference is that, unlike the IRS, you don't get notice for levies and the warrants. Those just happen. But you should have some inclination. You have this balance with New York State. Try to resolve it quickly, get into a payment plan, figure it out early on, because the state won't, let you know, hey, we're going to levy your bank account, or hey, we're going to issue a warrant, and you're thinking of selling your house and it's going to impede that. So again, they have installment payment agreements too, different parameters. You can get one up to 60 months usually without an issue. You pay its payment over time. Interest and penalties continue to apply. They will ask for a statement of financial condition. That's the form DTF-5, just to understand what is your ability to pay. Installment agreements must be paid in full. There's no partial payment like the one with the IRS, that partial pay agreement. They do direct debit, financial information, and I believe the interest rate now has changed. I believe it's increased now to 12% for balances without penalties, and it's a whopping almost 15% with balances that include penalties. So again, if you can get funding outside, really at a much lower interest rate, it's something to consider. Here again, they also have the same offers and compromises available, different forms, essentially the same availability to taxpayers, doubt as to collectability, doubt as to liability, and when there's some type of economic hardship. Again, the calculation is the same. They look to see your net equity and assets over your future earning potential. If it's doubt as to liability, you would need documentation to show why you're not liable for that, or why the amount of the liability should be much lower. Economic hardship, again, proof of your financial condition, and that this would cause huge economic hardship, and the New York State should accept your offer at the lower amount. Again, there's no down payment or application fee with New York State offers. Difference with the IRS offer, New York State does allow you to pay off the offer amount over 60 months. So that's something that the IRS does not offer. You have the lump sum or payment over 12 months. This would allow you to pay it over 60 months, which is, a nice little feature that they have.
With interest and penalties. But that over that 60 months, it's still including interest and penalties.
Still continue, those interest and penalties will continue to include an installment agreement, not on an offer and compromise. An offer and compromise, yes, you're right. If you do not do the lump sum offer or you want to pay it over time, interest will continue to accrue, not penalties. The New York State Voluntary Disclosure Program is a great program, especially for people who are not non-filers. For whatever reason, you have not filed for many, many years. If the state has not approached you first, if you have not gotten some type of notice from the state that you owe a liability for a certain tax year or tax years, this is a great program to come forward and say to the state, I haven't filed my taxes. I owe many, many years. I want to avoid penalties. I don't want to be referred for criminal. Please let me into this program. And it's a great program in that it will limit your look back period for 3 to 6 years, depending on circumstances. You really only pay the tax and the interest for those years. Penalties will be abated. You have to agree to pay all your future taxes, and you do not get referred to criminal, which is really a great program if you can fall into this situation. If you fail, sales tax does get the lower interest rate. Just want to mention that. And you can apply online. It's an online program that you apply. Here are the eligibility requirements. You're currently not under audit. You haven't received a bill, right? You have to get to the state before the state gets to you. You're not under criminal investigation, and you're not disclosing anything like in the realm of a tax shelter or tax avoidance scheme. Okay, and just quickly, I'll just go quickly back on the voluntary disclosure program. The way it works is you apply online. The state determines whether or not you meet the eligibility requirements, and they will grant you into the program. You receive an agreement, a voluntary disclosure agreement, which you review. You have to initial every page, and you have to file the underlying tax returns within 45 days of receipt of that agreement. So you can have your tax preparer prepare your tax returns. Do not file them. You file them with the voluntary disclosure agreement. It goes back to the voluntary disclosure unit, and it gets all processed there. Then you receive a bill. You can pay with the agreement, or you can pay afterwards, in which collections will send you a bill. And now also New York State offers the penalty abatement program. They don't have a first-time penalty abatement program such as the IRS does, but again, the premise is the same, reasonable cause, where it's available with this failure was due to reasonable cause and not willful neglect. So you didn't willfully do this. You didn't think to just not file just because you didn't feel like it or you didn't want to. The grounds are there: death, destruction of place of business, can't assemble your information, there's pending actions or proceedings. One that we often rely on is when the taxpayer had reliance on a third-party advisor. That really is the taxing authorities don't love that one, but if you do have that information or proof or a letter from a third-party advisor, your tax preparer, financial advisors, that incorrectly advised you on the preparation or the non-preparation of tax returns, it's certainly something that you may want to retain and use to get your penalties abated. You can request them online as well. And there's the address. And I think that's about it.
Well,
in a nutshell.
This has been awesome. I think, I guess first, does anyone have any questions for Marissa that they'd like to ask? All right. We will send everyone all of our contact info for sure. I think I've taken a couple things from this, kind of a good summary. And I think one of the things you've said a bunch of times, and it's so right, is open the envelopes you get from New York State and the federal, from the IRS. So many people just almost throw them out because it's something you don't want to even think about. But that interest and penalty starts accruing, and it only gets worse. If you somehow, or a client of yours, gets involved in a problem with the IRS or New York State, call us, right? The first step is to recognize we have a problem. And then from there, we can kind of work towards a solution. Number two, and this is what really always is mind-boggling to me, so many people, including affluent individuals, don't file their tax returns. You got to file your tax returns, because if you don't file your tax returns, once you get caught, it's a problem. And I guess the third is, if you have a problem, give Marissa a call. It just makes sense to understand what your options are. I see a question here. Let's see if I can find where those questions went. Where did that go? I just saw it. Oh, here it is. Oh, here's the chat right here. New York State mentioned you're allowed an installment plan if you owe $10,000 or less. How about if you owe more, Marissa?
No, absolutely. Those are available to you. It's just if you owe 20,000 or less, that's the amount for New York State, you can enter an installment of payment for over 36 months very easily. Possibly no financial information. Usually they require financial information, but it is available even into millions of dollars. It's just a matter of what is your ability to pay over time on a monthly basis. Sometimes the state will actually require some type of down payment, and a hefty one. Usually it's 25% of the outstanding liability. We've done much less. We've done those without a down payment, but New York State will ask for one if possible. And then absolutely, if you owe more than that amount, it's a matter of what your financial condition is and what you're comfortable paying. Because remember, if you're not making your payments timely, the installment agreement will default. The last thing you want to do is default your installment agreement, payment agreement in the case of New York State, is that it will be impossible or very difficult to enter into a new one. So if you have upcoming liabilities, or you know that you will not be able to make a payment, just notify the state. Wait until the new liability is processed and enter into get it incorporated in your current installment agreement, or wait and do the installment agreement at that time. Or if you're unable to make a payment, call the state, explain your situation. They are open to putting a pause on your account for 1 or 2 months, really not much more than that. But again, communication is key, documentation is key. And again, like Alan said, is being aware of the mail, opening those letters, and being proactive rather than reactive, because your options, as you see, are very limiting when you are acting in defense rather than offense.
proactive instead of reactive is probably the best way to handle the IRS.
Yeah.
So if you know, I guess we'll finish with, if you have clients that haven't filed tax returns, they've got to get to the IRS in New York State first, because once New York State and the IRS get to them, the game changes a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely reach out if you have any questions, want clarification on anything, just reach out.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Enjoy your first day post-solar eclipse. Hopefully we'll all be around in the 20, 30 years for the next solar eclipse. And best of luck with the IRS in New York State. All right,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Have an awesome day. Take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.